Welcome to the Impact Room, brought to you by Douglas Jackson, who help you hire more impactful, diverse leaders who stay for longer and are more successful. The Impact Room is a business, CX, and leadership podcast where exceptional, diverse, and impactful leadership and wisdom is shared. We dive deep into pressing topics that impact your customer-led business, featuring interviews with CEOs, COOs, Chief Customer, Chief People Officers, directors, influential leaders, and subject matter experts who share their lived experiences, top tips, thoughts, advice, and industry trends to help elevate existing and future talent. So let's dive into our next episode, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, or share if you enjoy this content. Thank you. So, hello. I'm Michelle Ansell, Managing Partner at Douglas Jackson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Christopher Farnath, author of Hiring Champions. Christopher has worked over 34 countries in senior leadership roles across the technology space as a Managing Director and Chief Customer Officer with software leaders and organisations including Aspect, Allocate, Tribal and Omnico. Christopher is now a CEO of Service Instinct, a business mentor, leadership development and executive coach, helping others to achieve and become their best possible version of themselves and, of course, better leaders. Christopher, hello. Lovely to see you and have you here today.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for that lovely introduction.
Not at all. Well, let's get into this then. So, why Hiring Champions?
Well, I think this is something that I have been forced into during my professional career. And it got to a point where I thought I needed to do this the proper way. And I started to build a process around it through all the roles that I was working in. And I think the thing that first came out really from my sort of experience was that I was always put into a situation because somebody left in my organization. So I was there thinking, all right, well, I've got probably a few weeks before they leave and I'm going to find a replacement. And then you advertise for the role and you get HR involved and you do all these wonderful things. Of course, then what happens is you get swamped by a huge tsunami of applications. And some people don't even read the application, they just submit their CV. So you end up filtering out this huge amount of mess, if you like, because it wasn't, you don't get the champion that I'm talking about. And I also found that all sorts of people would do these weird tricks, like they would pay people to get them through the first interview.
Really?
Often on a telephone, and they would refuse to come on camera, and they would just get somebody else to do it. And then when they showed up, they would be a different person from the person who did the first interview. And I've had that multiple times.
Wow.
Now, it took me about 3 times to think this isn't right before I started insisting on telephone interviews being with a video camera. So there was no chance of any fraud like that. But that was a real problem for a while. And so the first thing was obviously dealing with that mass. And I thought there has to be a better way just than reacting, because the reaction of this is, yes, you can outsource it, but what you end up doing is you hire somebody, and particularly, and this was the other part that I talk about in my book, you often get the situation where you've got the end of quarter coming round. So you've got this huge problem, this looming sword of Damocles hanging over you, where you know that if you don't get that requisition filled before the end of the quarter, there's a chance that they will simply say, right, all bets are off. You need to reapply after the quarter, because at that point, we'll see if we can afford it.
Yeah.
So you get into this huge problem of trying to get a warm body rather than nobody, which of course is the sort of catch-22 that you're in. But I would say, and this is something I call out, that if you recruit in haste, you will repent at leisure, because the reality is you'll get somebody in, and if you're lucky, they'll be good. And even if you do all the right things, they may be okay. but you haven't guaranteed anything. And there's a chance that during that probationary period that they'll want to swap, or they'll see that you're the stepping stone to somewhere else in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where I used to work was in a customer support center, particularly at Aspect. And that was the stepping stone, seen as the stepping stone within the business to go to the more sexy jobs, the professional services or the pre-sales or the consultant roles. And so people would come in, they'd see that it was just, a quick transition to something better. And so I needed to really get my head around, how do I stop that from happening? How do I make this the place that people want to be? And how do I get the right people? Those people, the champion hire is somebody that isn't just good at their job, but they fit the culture, they fit the values, and they have that supreme, infectious attitude that raises the bar for everybody. And so what I did was wrote this book specifically to help others think about what it needs to take to get that right. 20% of the time thinking and planning for what you really truly need.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And obviously this is music to my ears. And, I don't often, strangely enough, even though I'm a recruiter and executive search firm, we very rarely talk about recruitment specifically. And, it's really interesting to hear. And that's one of the things that I picked up when we spoke, wasn't it? That, you've obviously done this book about hiring champions. So, how do we, or should we, hire the champions then, Chris?
So I think you're absolutely right. There's a process that needs to be involved, but I think with anything, getting absolute clarity on what it is that you want, being there to really truly define what it is that you're looking for as a sort of future plan for your organization, and really sort of then spending time working out where those people exist. Because actually, surprise, surprise, they're not just sitting around waiting to be hired. They're usually doing a job. They're usually doing something outside that demonstrates those extra skills that you're looking for. They'll be online in communities. They'll be on LinkedIn. They'll be in other platforms. They may be in different forums. All of those are the places where you might find your champion hire. And the way I describe it in the book is once you've really understood, you've created your champion persona. What is it that you want? Where do they look like? What do they sound like? What are they from? Where are their backgrounds? What excites them? What age are they? What's their aspirations? What's their demographics? You really go into it, you nail it down, and you really think through the pieces that you have to do to say, I'm a match for this candidate. And so you go through the thinking of getting it right. And then, by the way, this is useful for you as well, because if you're a hiring manager and you've spent time with your HR team and you've got it nailed to the boards as to what it is that you're looking for, you can then outsource it to the likes of Douglas Jackson and make sure that you get the right person. Because that step of doing the planning is the most important. But you have absolute clarity on where you want it to be and where you want it to go. And the thing for me on this was, if you're just filling a backfill and you just want, I just want another person like that, you're not doing it justice. Because you could potentially look at the person that's just leaving, look at the strengths and weaknesses of that person and say, what is it that we liked about that person? And what is it that we didn't like about that person? Or what is it that would really help us to really craft and hone it? So it's not a snapshot of a photograph that you do once. It's something you do and regularly assess. And that enables you to take a movie. So you've got multiple photographs to see this movie of how your job profiles change over time. And that, I think, will make your organization fresh. It keeps you current with what the current thinking is. And it also allows you to grow and expand in the way that you want to. So yeah, all these little techniques and tools for actually thinking about where people will be needs the planning.
That's such a good point. And I've been in recruitment a long time, and I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever worked with a hiring manager or a HR team that has just done what you've outlined?
Yeah. And I think that's was the situations. And by the way, when in the organizations where I was, um, I think I became a really good friend and ally with the HR team because they truly saw the value that it brought to the group. And the reason why I spent the time writing the book, and actually it was quite an important thing. There was a chapter specifically about um, a particular task that I did in China to recruit into a call center in China, which was the motivation and the origin story of the book. But actually, the thinking around why it's so important to get it right with the processes is that actually, if you get it right, you're creating a template that allows people to grow and also something that allows people to become special with it, and they actually reflect on you as the hiring manager. So if you bring in 5 or 6 champions and you start to excel, you'll get known in your role for being the person that attracts these wonderful people.
Yeah.
And people, there's a book called Good to Great by Jim
Yeah.
Collins,
Yeah.
and he talks about the level 5 managers. Level 5 managers absolutely know who to recruit
Yeah.
and how to recruit them, because
Yeah.
it's about the focus on making sure that you're bringing in people who reflect well on you.
Mm.
So in my current position with regards to a career coach, um, definitely having that knowledge of how to recruit champions is also the outcome is that you get seen to be the leader that they want to promote.
It's such an important point because, I mean, reflecting on my statement that I made, I mean, it might be that people that come to me, there might be a lot of people like you and HR teams that have done it and do it really well, and maybe they don't need someone like me because they do it so well. But I do find that the planning side of things is always the area that if we looked at any other element of what a leader might do in an organization and a senior leader, the planning and the time and the energy and the effort that goes into all of those things. But as you say, as a leader, you live or die by the people that are
Yeah,
working for you, and they make your life fundamentally easier or substantially more difficult, and more stressful and pressured, and also they put your job at risk, because if you don't
totally.
achieve, you're under the cosh and you're not going to get your goals, targets, achievements, commit promotions and what have you. But yet, given the in such an important element is having these champions, these really great people in your team and other leaders, it seems to me it's the area that people put least attention to. They
Yeah,
do not put into it the same level of that they would in any other project or process or change or transformation, yet it is fundamentally one of the most important elements.
it is. I spent a long time in my career working with customers. This is a chief customer officer was my last 2 C-suite roles before taking on my own business. And the importance of that position really is to understand just what the customer wants, and you really understand what it takes to, asking them what does success look like to you. And if you don't take the time to really truly understand that, you're not going to get the outcomes that they want, or you'll be lucky if you do. Now, if you think about the people that you hire in, if they don't know what it is that they're going to do, and they don't have the vision of what the customer is looking for, how are they going to be effective in their
Mm,
roles?
mm,
And the other part, and it really matters here, is that onboarding of a person into an organization, like onboarding a new piece of software into your operations, is so important.
mm,
And that's why the book takes you from the selection process of the planning right the way through the sort of processes of asking the questions and outsourcing and going through the filtering and then doing the selection and then doing the interviewing and then doing the welcome and offer and then the onboarding. And I take it from pre-start right the way through to 90 days. And without doubt, there is a system, it's a playbook of steps that you need to take with a new employee, that you need to start wooing them to bring them on. That relationship is cemented in the first 90 days. But actually, I take it back even further. The relationship is cemented from the first conversations you have right through the selection process. And one of the most amazing sort of magical moments that I found was people who go through the same process, particularly when they get to the workshop where we do I always insist on having a role play afternoon based workshop where people come in and they go through these activities that demonstrates that they can do it. High pressure, difficult to do, recognize that it's quite awkward for people to make it through. But if you're dealing with customers, which of course my speciality was that, you've got to be able to deal with things. So you look for the right attitudes, you look for the right mindset, you look for the right activities. But the magic that I'm talking about is that if you happen to have multiple vacancies and you have two or three people who've been through that process together, and you offer two or three from the same group that you hire, they have this amazing bond before they join the company. And all you have to do is send them a couple of things like, ask them to, send them a cap with your branded company on. Ask them to take a photo of themselves doing something with it, and then it gets shared across your intranet. You get shared, and people then get to see who's coming into the team, and they're excited and they know something. You ask them to fill out some personal information they're willing to share, so that when they first meet somebody who's been in the company 10 years can say, "Oh, I know you support West Ham, or you support Man City, or whatever, and you, or I know you like going ice skating, or you go flying, or all these different things that people do and say in these intro bios actually makes the experience of those first few days less awkward for the candidate and really makes them feel part of the organization. And that pays off big style.
Yeah. And, again, you've made some fantastic points. And I think, sometimes someone like us, it does help put all this together for organisations. But if they don't want to be utilising someone like us, the steps that you're saying, those are the fundamental to bringing people on board. And it is just these little things, because the process is so broken in so many organisations, from the start of the advert, if that's the way they're going to go, or the briefing of the recruiter, if that's the way they're going to go, or the briefing of the HR or talent team. From there, if it's broken from there, there's not a hope in hell's chance of getting it right at the end, is there? And and every little touch point has a margin of error and sort of a cost, in terms of you're going to lose somebody, or you lose that little bit of will, or you lose that little bit of excitement or passion or whatever it might be for the role. So some great points that you've made, and makes such a big difference to the ultimate outcome, doesn't it?
I mean, from the purpose of the book, what I have written in are a number of bear traps, and what the sort of little ways to get around those bear traps can be. And I'm just thinking of things like, for example, if you apply for something and you don't hear back, you're ghosted straight away. If that person is a candidate, is a somebody who you think might be good at some point, they're never going to talk to you again. You just ghosted them. And you've got to realize that these things actually matter. And the other thing is, if you my wife applied to a job with a big retail outlet, and she submitted her application. It came back to her within 30 seconds saying, "You're not successful." And the reason for that was it was all done through automation. Now, technically, there's an opportunity for you to go back and say, hang on, I want to be assessed by a human being, not just automation. But you have to be aware that there are all sorts of things that could catch you out. Even if you're the most suitable candidate, if you go through an ATS system, that is, one of my colleagues put in his CV once, "I do not speak Chinese," thinking it would be really funny, and then got offered 4 or 5 jobs that required Chinese spelling.
Right.
Chinese language, because it said Chinese in his
Chinese.
CV,
Yeah.
and the automation pulled it out and put him forward, and he just
Mm,
said he didn't speak Chinese.
mm,
So I know that that sounds silly, but it's a point that you do need to be aware of.
mm.
And I think the ATS system, there's a chap that I've worked with previously who runs an assessment of your CV against the ATS to
Right.
profile you to see exactly how you will appear
Right.
and what you score strongly on.
Mm,
So the first time, first time I put my CV through, it came up with a whole range of administrator jobs,
mm.
um, that all very good jobs, but certainly wasn't in leadership.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was that I had been a system administrator and
Mm,
talked about my technical skills being around that. And the word administration just came up far more than other keywords.
mm.
And therefore, I was put forward for that. So, again, things that you need to be aware of that you perhaps don't know when you're putting your CV into whichever application it is.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And for job seekers, it's gold because I speak to so many and talk to so many people. And I mean, we only do leadership recruitment, but the issues that they have with ATSs or people who aren't as well versed as perhaps you and I at sort of sifting CVs or seeking them out. I mean, even when if you look at my profile and if let's say I look at a job on LinkedIn and I might do that regularly, I'm in the top 5 or 10% for the role. Now the roles I'm looking at are chief operating officers, chief commercial officers, chief customer officers. I can't do that role. I serve
Yes.
that community. I understand what those, but because my profile's optimized for those words, it says I'm a top percentile individual, and that talks to the point that you've made, how wrong or difficult or challenging the system can be, and how the individuals, as you say, can be caught out significantly.
Yeah, I make a point in the book about the importers in following the guidelines from CIPD. They say it's the right way is to use human and
Mm,
automation to
mm,
do the most effective filtering, because you
mm.
do have a huge amount. I mean, again, you know, I always think back. I don't know whether you saw The Office with Ricky Gervais
Yeah.
way back. That side where he takes half of the CVs and he drops them in the bin and he says, "I only recruit the lucky people," um, which I thought was a tremendous way of filtering. But it is that whole approach to how you make your cut as to why are you chopping somebody. I know some people say they cut if they haven't submitted a covering letter.
Mm,
And this just becomes a technique, because you could have somebody who's absolutely fabulous who has missed the point about sending a covering letter or has failed to attach it or something has happened, and then they get excluded, and yet they're the
mm,
best candidate for the role.
mm, mm,
Very, very difficult to do. So you really got to think about where you make the cut and where you make the
mm,
decisions around it.
mm,
But I think one of the things that I found from doing the work that I've done is one of the fortunate things is I've been able to travel the world
mm.
and recruit into multiple different regions. One of the things I put in the book was the Chinese. I call it the Olympic adventure, because that was a whole process about recruiting in China, where I
Mm.
had to hire the people into a Chinese call center, which needed 21 people. All of them had to speak English and Chinese. All seven of them had to speak English, Chinese, and Japanese, and seven of them
Right.
had to speak English, Chinese, and Korean. And the whole approach to that was that when I went through this recruitment workshop, we'd done a lot of the selection beforehand, but we got the groups that we went through, and it was a bit of a production line for about 12 days going through that, recruiting in those people. But we batted it out of the park and we got all 21, and they
Wow.
actually turned out to be some of the best employees that we'd ever had.
Mm,
Again, we did a proper approach to onboarding. We had a lot more, perhaps, flexibility because we had a lot of interest in setting that new center up. But at the end of the day, what showed was that the processes, and I've just talked about China, Japan, and Korea, but the processes of bringing people on board actually is the same whether you're in China, whether you're in South Africa, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in Central Europe, whether you're in Australia, or whether you're in America, which I have hired into and been out there, the same sort of expectations. People want clarity. People want to understand what it is they want to do, what they're able to do, and they need the ability to demonstrate that they can do it. And I think, there are, without doubt, cultural differences between people, but take that aside, you could build that into your profiles if you want them to be planning, and that's critical. So I think there are similarities as well as the opportunity to have these wonderful people all over the world.
Yeah, fantastic. Because I know I was going to talk about, the fact that you've been in 34 countries and what are the common themes. So you've really sort of just highlighted those. It effectively is the same. I mean, is there anything else that you feel that sort of is across those, or you've gained from that experience across those various countries?
Yeah, I think certainly when the world of outsourcing and pushing business process outsourcing, I set up 2 operations in the Philippines. I set up multiple operations in India, and also onboarded people into Macedonia. So you get a different type of experience by going out and doing that sort of experience of bringing people on. But if you have done the planning correctly and you've made the point right up front what you're looking for, those people exist in all the territories that you go looking for. And I think the Western culture is very much of a well-known experience. People know what people want in that. So if you make it and you're rigid with your demands about who it is that you want, and you know, go work with your recruiter to actually say, right, let's go through some mock interviews with some of the candidates you're putting forward and give immediate feedback. So that one was good because of this one was good because of that one was totally wrong. Don't tell me anything like that. And you do this sort of testing between the recruiter and the person coming into as the candidate to actually see who you're best selecting. It's a fine tuning process, but I do think I've never had a problem with hiring people into different regions. The one thing I would say about the cultures, they can be an advantage if you've got a business in that country. So, for instance, we at Aspect we had an awful lot of German business. So we had a few operations that were based in Germany, and the ability to have natural language speakers based in the country who absolutely were from that region knew and gave a better experience than those that were perhaps from India. But even saying that, you can do initiatives, which is what we used to do, which was send people from one culture and one country to go and spend time in the other locations, to especially if there's a follow the sun type culture within your business, to send people to all these, to give them as candidates or them as employees the opportunity to travel around, to give them different experiences, but also to standardize the practices, particularly those that you want from one culture into another. And one of the things that was really peculiar was when we're going back sort of 20 plus years here, when India became a big place for outsourcing, what you used to find was they're very, very technical. On the phone, they would ask a question to the person, and then the customer would say, I think we did this and did this. What do you think? And then they would go, let me just check. They'd start typing away on the keyboard, doing remote access or something like that. And there'd be huge, huge delays in total silence when they're working away on this technical problem, and the customer's sitting there going, are you still there? Is what's going on? And it was really just difficult for them to understand. So we spent a long time training them on those pieces. I didn't go as far as some organizations did, which was sort of give their colleagues different names from the local, like an Indian guy with a name like, I don't know, Bill or John, a very culturally mixed name. And when they had a different name, I didn't do that. I thought it was important to keep that, but it was the ability to understand how to engage with somebody and be conscious that of how you sound on the other end of the phone
Yeah.
to that particular help desk person. So interesting to do that. There are differences and strengths from that.
Interesting. So I know you and I have talked about the elevation of talent and future leaders, and a subject that's close to both of our activities and businesses now. So do you want to talk a little bit to the importance of mindset?
Definitely. Yeah, I think without doubt, I think this is something that I spent a long time in coaching with my cohorts. What the thinking is in terms of the mindset. First of all, it's a number of steps. Having absolute clarity, knowing what it is that you want to do, and being crystal clear about what that end goal looks like. Because, I mean, Mike Tyson said it best: everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's that approach about being able to understand where you're heading, but being flexible about the methodology by which you get there. So if you've got a mindset that is determined, focused, and understands what the end game is going to be, what success looks like, you are less likely to be distracted. And when the inevitable, thing hits you that's going to knock you off course, you are more resilient to be able to go, well, okay, let's assess what that is. Let's take an opportunity to be more reflective on it and say, right, can we do it a slightly different way? Still knowing we've got to get to that end goal. So that's the first thing, is gaining the clarity. The second most important thing is having a positive mindset and a can-do approach. And I think this is really, really important. Saying what you can do or what you can influence is the next step, rather than saying what you can't do. You are literally wasting your breath. Nobody wants to hear what you can't do. I mean, you hear these, classic sort of comedy sketches where somebody walks into a garage and they say, how much is that going to cost? And the first thing they do, wouldn't have done it that way, and you get that immediate sinking feeling, because nobody wants that. What you've got to think about is, right, what can I do? What can I influence? Even when the answer is no. And actually on my LinkedIn profile, I've got a mini blog about how to be positive even when the answer is no, because it talks about what it is. Being clear about what you can do doesn't mean you have to say yes to everything. It just says what you can do and what you will do. And actually, the communication piece on that is probably the most important, because the next step on this is the ability to communicate clearly and to be understood. Because a lot of the dialogue now is over these sort of Zoom type calls and Teams calls. You don't always get that when you're communicating. And perhaps the worst example of this is where somebody sends something that's emotional, because they're saying, I'm not able to deliver this by that date, but I can do this by this date, which actually can be received quite well, particularly when you can see somebody. But if you send that as an email, and the first thing that they read is you're not going to do what they ask them to do, they're going to read it in the emotion they're in, not the helpful emotion that you were offering in the first place.
Yeah.
So that piece around communication is the third piece. So you've got your absolute clarity, you've got your can do, and you've got your clear communication. And then the fourth piece, I would say, which is really significant, is ownership. And as a leader, if you want to be a human-centered leader, which of course is a significant, um, it's culturally acceptable these days to have human-centered leaders. The autocratic or the military style lead, even in the military, it's changed hugely.
Yeah.
But those that just throw their weight around and are toxic, they're the dinosaurs. You need human-centered leaders. So you need the ability as somebody in that place to be accountable. And what I mean, there's a great book, I can never remember the name of it, but it's called Extreme Ownership. It's written by two ex-Navy SEALs,
Okay.
and they talk about the ability of a leader to affect the outcomes of in their case the selection process for a Navy SEAL. And in that process, they talk through about extreme ownership. And even when something goes wrong, the boat commander always takes ownership for that. And although we're not talking in business about everybody being a Navy SEAL, you are talking about that person driving an operation and making sure that they have a team that will work with them to the best outcome. And so if you've actually worked through those key things and you've engaged with your team in a way that when they get something right, you reflect how well they've done. And when they've not done something quite the way that you expected and hasn't worked to the outcome, you publicly take ownership for that and take immediate steps to demonstrate that you have recognized it. And if you've made a mistake personally, that you are going to take the steps to correct it. And I think the importance about a leader is you're doing it for the business, but you're also involving and engaging your team to bring them along. So never closing them down is critical.
Yeah, such good points there. And when I look at, because we know that, there's not, I don't know how many, but there's not very many good leaders, are there? There's a very small amount of great leaders. I think there's an awful lot of poor leaders. Yet every one of those points is something each of us can take responsibility for and change if we so wish. So, I mean, do you think everyone has what it takes to become a great leader?
I think it's definitely a skill. And if you've got the determination and the aptitude, you absolutely can become a good leader. This is a set of skills that you can learn. I think people can learn to drive and they can drive, and some people really excel at it. Some people are just really good at it, and some people aren't so good. And the whole point is the metaphor I'm making is I think people can be coached to be good leaders. And I think the reality is there are a certain set of disciplines. There's a sort of leadership is a thing that we do as a philosophy. You can lead. There's some roles that require leadership, and then there's the disciplines of leadership that you have to go through. And because there are leadership disciplines, you can train somebody to understand how to deliver those best. Now, I've been involved in delivering some academy-based training for leadership. And without doubt, I see people really come to life when they can start talking through things and really understand, I do this, or I don't agree with my manager. What do I do? How do I maintain my position? All these wonderful things that come out. And as a leader, you can have techniques to work on these things. So all the different steps that you go through, and there are training courses that will take you through those steps, and I know one or two of them if anybody wants to ring me afterwards, that will help you through those processes to elevate your skill set. And I think the
Excellent.
other one
Yeah.
last thing on that is, as a person going through their training or person going through their role, and they're wanting to move on to the next piece, they want to be in the next role, having that, elevating that leadership and leadership presence and understanding what it takes to be doing that next role is a critical step in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And some, great comments again that you've made there. So what do you think companies, or where do you think companies go wrong when it comes to having great leaders?
I think that's a terrific question. I mean, there was I can't remember where the stat is based from, but there are regularly people promoted into a position that they're not trained for,
Mm,
and you see sort of this peculiar opportunity cost. Somebody is performing extremely well in the role that they're doing. They think, well, we'll promote them
mm,
because that's how we'll retain them.
mhm,
Put them into a position they're not really good at. They start to get really concerned. They get imposter syndrome. They get all these key things which will frighten them. Some might try and fake it till they make it, all the rest of it, all these phrases you hear. And they're no longer doing the great thing that they used to be doing.
mm,
So now you've got maybe a new hire who's trying to learn the ropes. You've got somebody who was brilliant at the role who's no longer there. They're doing a role that they're not really good at. And the investment in the training for that new position, not just in the performance of the role, but actually what are the competencies that are required in leadership?
mm,
That's why companies go wrong.
mm.
And it's not because they don't have great people. It's because they don't recognize that there's actually a set of skills. Going back to our earlier point, you can train somebody on how to be a great leader.
I think there's a big gap, isn't there? You tend to get quite good skills and ability training, don't you? And when you're onboarded, and then when you're in a leadership position, most leaders will have a senior lead, they'll have a coach or something, and they'll get personal development potentially. But then there's this gap in the middle, isn't there? And that's where, as you say, these early managerial or sort of mid managers or whatever, and they don't get that support that they need to become a good leader.
Mm.
It's a massive hole in the ladder, the career ladder, really.
Yeah, and the other big thing that I found when I was promoted into the C-suite is it's a lonely place.
Mm,
You don't often get the feedback that you do
mm,
as a middle manager. Middle manager will often be told you're doing well, you've got a performance review, your team, but these are the things that we're going to be doing, this is how you're
mm,
doing, blah blah blah, all those metrics, sorry. But as a senior leader, you're working towards a corporate initiative. You define your own measures.
mm,
You talk about how you're going to get that. You have to lead others to that point. You have to be the visionary. And actually, there are very few checks and balances on you, except
mm,
obviously, are you meeting the company
mm,
targets?
mm,
So it can be quite a challenge because you do worry when you're in that position
mm,
if you're doing the right thing. Now, I've had some of the most amazing chief execs that I've reported to, and the ones that always I used to work well with were the ones that sort of just wanted to understand that I knew what I was needing to do and then let me get on with it.
mm,
Those that interfere, those that go around me, or those that started to undermine what I did, I couldn't survive with those sort of
mm,
people
mm,
because you either want somebody to be successful or you don't. And
mm.
once you're at that C-suite, if you don't want them to be successful, don't waste your time. Just
Yeah, for
move
sure.
on.
Mm,
It's there's literally no point in hanging around with those sort of places. But
yeah, I agree with you. So I'm listening to this. I'm either a leader, but don't think I'm doing a good job at the minute, or I aspire to be one. What are your top tips?
I would say really go through what you do today. That's the first thing. You must have seen, if you haven't, look it up, the Eisenhower matrix, which talks about what's urgent and important, what's important but not urgent, what's not urgent and important, and what's not urgent and not important. And you go through the process of do now, schedule, delegate, and stop, because those four things are really the first things you should do. because if you keep on doing everything you're doing today, you will continue to do it. The other thing is, don't try and become a super fantastic reactive person. There's a lot of jobs, particularly in customer facing jobs, that are forced into a reactive mode. If you do that, I guarantee that in X amount of time, and that could be months, years, or decades, you will burn out or you'll give up. And the reason is that there are better ways to be thinking than always just reacting. And that is by being proactive. Thinking about what it is that the customer or your stakeholder wants and making sure you're getting ahead of the game so that there are no surprises for them, so that it's classic customer success. Understanding what a customer is looking to do with a particular piece of software and making sure that they're delivering on it by helping them adopt that particular software in the way, using the metrics that's coming right, data-driven decision making that actually enables you to then take preventative action before it becomes a problem that you have to react to. You'll find your time will come back to you in spade loads, and you can focus on the other things like executive presence, getting your branding right, making sure that you're delivering to the targets, and inspiring your team around you, which of course takes a moment to happen to you in your career, usually, to make it become that obvious. And that happened to me in 2008.
Great tips, thank you. Anything else you wanted to share before we finish off then?
I think this has been a terrific opportunity, and thank you for the invitation to talk about some of these things, because I think this is an area which is not really focused on the number of organizations that are out there that just promote people into leadership without truly investing in it, is way below 50%. And that's significantly a problem, given where we're going in the industry. So on that, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today.
Not at all. It's been fabulous, and we could still be talking, I'm sure, into the weekend, because it's real passion points of mine that you've talked to. So I really, really appreciate you coming on and joining us and giving your thoughts, Chris. Thank you so much.